within the session, after the session, if you go to Slido/lunch, if you want to provide any of your thoughts, you can do that there. It's sli.do/lunch. Before starting, I want to give a thank to you guys to keep us going and coming to the meetups. Thank you a lot. Give yourself a round of applause, please. We gave one to Jeff, but again, Jeff, our speaker, accepted to talk today, and our host, Mackenzie Investment. Thank you for providing the space and the food. We really appreciate it. And with all that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to present all your.
Okay, so the title of my presentation is The Alternative to Coaching Agile Practices, which is a strange, probably a title for some that are going to an Agile meetup. Probably a lot of, how many Agile coaches in the room? At least a couple. How many, what I would call sort of Agile practitioners? Scrum Masters, story writer extraordinaires, engineers. Okay, awesome, almost everybody. With a few kind of, I guess, interested folks who want to learn more. So everyone here probably uses Agile practices in some way, shape, or form and likes using them. So despite the title of my presentation, this is not about badging Agile practices, because I want to say I love them. Then I'm going to do the butt and get all into it and stuff, but I just want to say that I'm a very, very avid Agile practitioner. Right back when JUnit first came out, and I didn't even know what Agile was, but I loved the whole idea of being able to write tests and automating everything that I did. I got the first version of Cruise Control way back when by Martin Fowler, when it was one servlet and a JSP and a little Ant script that was broken, and you had to kind of get in there and make everything work. So my passion for Agile gradually evolved from the programming side into the management side and into sort of what I'll call the customer value side. And I gradually went from a single practitioner to a team of practitioners to running my own consultancy, where that's all I do now for a living. It's help organizations, specifically organizations that are comprised of technology knowledge workers, be awesome at what they do. And a lot of the skills that we bring to bear, of course, are in the Agile space. On the side, I've got 2 wonderful kids. I've got a wife that makes everything work, both my business and my home life, head of operations and head of family operations. Some skills. Of course, I'm a big geek, so role-playing games and video games are in there. I program a bit on my spare time, just so if I do talk to other programmers, I can actually have some credibility. They don't just laugh at me out the room. And of course, I love traveling abroad, and I try to get away at least once or twice a year. As an aside, I've written a book called The Lean Change Method. The idea here is that if you're going to go in one of these big, scary, crazy, agile organizational transitions, and you're part of that agile change team, go run it like a startup. A lot of the lessons that you learn from creating value in conditions of high uncertainty apply to when you're trying to go and help organizations improve their agility. You guys get the book for free. The URL's right there. Once I upload the presentation, you can grab it or take a photo, and I'll wait if you want to just take a photo and grab it. And I always love answering questions from people who've read this. I think just spreading that information is helpful. Okay. I'm going to give some context, because the lessons that I've learned and the things I've done are applicable so far to the context that I am in. They will not be universally applicable to your context. And I think that's one thing that's missing in most Agile conversations, whether it be about Scrum, Safe, Flow, validated learning, you name it. These things are applicable in a particular context using a particular approach, and when they're in your context, everything needs to be adjusted and adapted. So I want to explain this context. If you see things that are familiar to your context, then you could say, hey, maybe some of the things that I'm talking about make sense for you. So I'm working with a group of coaches. There's about 4 of them, and we're working across around 10 to 12 teams. All those 10 to 12 teams are working on the same or very similar set of technology platforms. There's about, depending on how you count it, externals, contractors, dependent, probably about 200 full-time equivalents working within what I'll call this ecosystem or this portfolio. Spotify calls them tribes. But the point is that we've got a lot of self-organizing teams working on individual pieces of business value, all towards a common mission. In this case, it's in what's known as the online, or sort of the technology payment space. Specifically, all of the channels and ways that customers can interact with various payments and making them. Everything from the internal servicing, the onboarding, the mobile channels, the web channels. So that's a bit of context. It's in what I'll call your, let's see if I have that on the second slide. I'll talk about it here. It's what I would call classic big IT. It's got all kinds of cultural debt. It's got both, serious states of ignorance, negligence, and just kind of like not paying attention to things, coupled with massive amounts of hardcore command and control.
It's a bank.
It's a bank, guys, yeah. It's also a Scottish bank, so maybe I'm learning too much. Has anyone ever seen Braveheart?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So they won a few battles, didn't they, right? Against a very organized competition. But it wasn't exactly organized. But there was some heroics there, and there were some very strong personalities, and there are some people really committed to accomplishing their mission. So it's not that there's a lack of desire to do the right thing. It's not that there's a lot of people not trying hard. It's just a culture that has done it, has been used to doing it through grit and determination. And that's kind of something worth thinking about. I started what I'll call an Agile Transformation Consultancy in Deloitte probably in 2006. That's where I started. And most people at Deloitte would laugh at you and say, what is this Agile stuff? That's a bit of a joke. What are you, a process consultant? I don't even know what that is. I'm like, no, we're going to help change the mindset, culture, operating model, and structure of people to a new method of working. And I had one person say, yes, go do it. And then I stood it up like you would stand up any other consultancy. I've since then gone on my own, brought my own consultancy with me, and we've taken some of that lessons learned around how to operate as a consultant with us, and you'll sort of see this kind of approach here that I want to talk to you about. So, we'll come in and we'll say, hey, let's go look at your value, let's look at your architecture, let's look at your capability, let's look at your existing operating model, let's look at what you're not allowed to do, and let's kind of come up with a good overarching team model, tried model, connecting it to backlogs, connecting it to systems. Let's start kicking off some of these teams, not all at once, so we can learn a bit more about what we're doing. Let's do integrated training, coaching, get them onto what I call the foundational Agile practices, stories, sprints, get the roles in place like Scrum Masters. We do a lot of Kanban, so get some visual flow going. And then as we're going, let's start moving on to the advanced stuff and scaling it up. And that's kind of what most people would say is a reasonable approach to rolling out Agile in a large organization. If you guys feel like that's not a reasonable approach, put up your hand. I want to talk to you later because I'm gonna do the but, right? So, who has seen this? So we go in, we teach people what a fine-grained incremental value is. Everyone heard of invest before in their stories, right? We get them to say must be valuable, must be testable, must be independent. It's got to be this thing of value so that we can track it and we can understand, we can get feedback out of it. And we get in and they're doing reasonably well. The coach leaves after a couple of months, comes back, and here's what we see. Stories that look like this. Build the database table, define the WSDL schema, I don't know, a million sort of tasks that are kicking around. And they've basically devolved back into task management. Anybody? Or is it just me? And if you guys haven't, then I wanted you guys to work for me because you're a better coach than I am. This is probably the 90% case that I've seen that most things happen. So stories proving to be extremely hard to teach. And then let's try and add a new method to the equation of doing it. Has anyone seen a cumulative flow diagram before?
Not?
Not seen one. Who's not seen one? Then I'll go into more explanation. Or who has seen one? Sometimes people like to do the positive. Okay, I'm going to do a recap anyway. A cumulative flow diagram is a lot like a burn-up chart. So for you choose the increment of value you want to track. It could be at the release level, the feature level, the story level, but it's got to be some increment of value. It shouldn't be tasks. And then instead of just tracking like in progress done, which is sort of like a burn-up chart, it's either not done or it's done, you track multiple states over time. So you might say, hey, in this case, the states were discovery, I need to take my glasses off, actually I'll just look back here, story testing done, feature testing done, out to market, deployed. Apologies, it's a bit of a word chart for some of you guys in the back. So here's your story sketch, here's your story testing done, feature done, and deployed. And this could be like your classic sort of agile-ish flow, right? You've got a reasonably frequent amount of people getting and figuring out their stories. They're going through, engineering and unit testing and story testing relatively frequently on a sprint-by-sprint basis, but they're not quite ready to test everything until they have some bigger amalgamation of features, so that's happening less frequently. And they haven't quite worked it out with their release program or project yet, because those guys are still on a train that says once every 6 months or 4 months or whatever it is. So they're still releasing every 4 to 6 months, but it's definitely a lot better than it was. This would be the cumulative flow diagram that most teams would show during a sprint review. They'd flash it up, they'd say, everything's great. They'd show it to their stakeholders, and they'd go, oh, I don't understand this diagram, but everything looks great. And everyone would be happy, and then I would say this. You are completely full of shit. There is no way that everything looks like this. In fact, whenever I see something like that, I go red, red, red. CFD for me is actually it's a painting, and it's the art of showing people's pain over time. That's what a cumulative flow diagram is. And if it doesn't show pain, something's wrong, because everybody's in pain. No matter how healthy you are, you're going to the doctor for some reason. Everybody's got a problem. So I kind of looked at it as sort of 3 reasons. The first one is the team just doesn't feel safe showing this. We've got these sprint reviews, and sprint reviews are to show progress to the customer. We do demos. We do, hey, what's going on? Eventually, everyone loves these sprint reviews. They all start coming in. All of a sudden, you've got VPs from other organizations there. It's not a safe space to go and show reality. The other is that for whatever reason, the teams just don't understand this diagram. It's got multiple states, there's multiple colors. I know when I first looked at it, I didn't understand it, and I was like, something has more than 2 pieces of information on it, I kind of don't want to see it. And they just don't understand how to do it, so they just go and do the thing that intuitively looks right and don't actually track it properly. And of course, the last piece that's really bad is that, well, the coaches said we should do it, so we're going to do it. Right? There's a common one we get. A lot of our teams are 50% full-timer, 50% outsourced from a company like Tech Mahindra or you name it. And there's a very much of a culture of someone's asked me to do something, it's better for me to do it than question it. Right? And so there was a whole lot of, I would almost call this sort of like the ugly part of it. If I actually went to a team, this is what their cumulative flow diagram looked like. Let's do a whole bunch of discovery, race ahead. Oh, let's change our minds. Let's go ahead. Let's change our mind. Oh, discovery hasn't come up with engineering. Engineering's sick of waiting for development. Let's go ahead of engineering. Let's start ignoring what the stories look like completely because they don't make sense anyway. Oh, because we did that, we made a mistake. Let's go redo it again. Oh, we're not really going to deliver anything all the way up to the end. Hey, by the way, our throughput is really this, and at the end it was like this because we worked 24 hours a day. I can actually say on those 12 teams, every one of them looked a little like this, if we acted like that. One of the coaches is there, he's nodding his head. He's like, yeah, this is my pain for the last 3 months. So the real problem is reporting this is significantly worse than reporting this. This, if you can show that to people and have a healthy conversation, is the first step to becoming a high maturity organization. Showing pain and talking about it and using that to drive all of the conversations that you have. It takes a lot of courage. It's not easy to do, but it can be done, and I'll get to sort of the punchline, without introducing a whole lot of different agile practices. It's about introducing and showing the pain. So I'm going to say some positive things here, though. Despite all of this is actually order of magnitude more mature than they were before we introduced Agile. Order of magnitude. Things were getting delivered. We had, people could figure out the actual state of things if they went to their visual systems. We had business and technology, including like the real business, not the proxies, coming to stand-ups, coming to higher level tribe meetings, looking at, we were using throughput to plan things. Like we actually said, how many stories is this compared to that one? How many stories can the teams do over time? Let's not overload the teams. So there's a whole lot of good stuff happening, But the real problem with me is nobody was looking at any of this and learning from it and getting any better. We can talk about sprint reviews and sprint retrospectives. Now again, this is context specific. This is not a I hate sprint reviews and sprint retrospectives or Scrum or anything else type of talk. This is in this context, it wasn't working. We would end up having a sprint review where the Scrum Master and the product owner and maybe a lead or two would do a lot of talking. VPs and directors would ask a lot of questions. And it would be like, has anyone been to if anyone's old enough, they probably went to dances in the 80s where a lot of goth music was playing and everyone's just kind of standing on the wall like this, afraid to get into the center. Someone's old enough to be laughing. Good. All right.
It was like that in the 60s, too.
Yeah, okay. It's like your first high school prom where you're just, like it's just nobody is saying a single thing, right? Everybody's quiet. And, for me, I think sprint reviews are the chance for the team to showcase what they've done and how good it is. It's not an opportunity for just 2 or 3 stakeholders to talk to 2 or 3 leaders. That's not the right forum for it. It doesn't seem appropriate. The retros were similar. They were a little bit safer. There's a little bit less kind of like everybody comes in and wants to get involved, so that made it a little bit easier to do. But people would get to the I don't like this, I do like this, kind of type thing. There was no systemic improvements coming out of these retrospectives. I'll get into why in a second. So people are actually starting to abandon them, right? So I guess the big one here, optics. I remember a Scrum Master was saying, hey, we actually do have a bottleneck in our flow, and we need help with product owners and UX to move this. And that got right up to the certain VP, and how could you say that in a sprint review, and we're not allowed to call each other out, and we're like, wow. So authenticity was just gone in these sessions. So I'm going to go do a bit of a Clint Eastwood cowboy movie here. I talked a bit about the bad, really bad story writing. Hygiene on the Kanbans was barely adequate. No understanding of flow. Flow was made up. We put these CFDs on the walls. They gamed it. You could, sometimes they gamed it well and looked good. Sometimes it looked ridiculous and things would happen that were impossible, like 0 lead time for the last 3 weeks for everything that needed to happen because it would just come up like this because everything was going down. So, and literally I go, and then everyone were like, how could we not know that this project was late? I'm like, guys, it's right there, and no one looked at it, right? Big batch movement. Like movement would go. The problem with the stories being tasks is, imagine a team that has a workflow that looks like design, build, test. I know it's a bit of a waterfall workflow, but just pretend for a second. And the story, there's 10 stories in design. Only one of them was a story, 9 of them were tasks. Engineering tasks, by the way. They would actually be like, oh, these stories don't really need to go through design, and they would move it to engineering and move it to test with no work done. So they were counting flow of stuff where no work was happening. And then the real story would finally move through, and to all intents and purposes, it looked like they had perfect flow, but really something was passing through the system every 2 months or something like that. But it looked great, it looked amazing. And it was actually masking the problems. Everything looked good. The ugly piece for me was the reviews and retros. That was the ugly piece, right? There's things that aren't great, but what's really ugly is when you have reviews where people feel like they can't talk and it's wasting the team's time, and you have retros where there's no systemic improvements coming out of them. And the fact that we would have teams that were about to go and work 24/7 because their discovery took so long, and now they're really into the engineering, and they're working 24/7 to make it up, and they wouldn't admit it. They gamed, this was a really smart team, they gamed their CFD to make it look good. And we were like, guys, and we had to go in there, coach, and say, no, this is reality, this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to say. By the way, that team's made fantastic improvements since this, so there'll be some good news stories after this. So the lack of not feeling safe and not demonstrating capability to learn was the ugliest piece of this. And by the way, I would probably say that this is a relatively reasonable adoption effort. I know I'm making it sound really terrible because, if you look at all these things, these are all really good things. They're not doing TDD, but they're getting plain old unit testing through the door. They've got some CI. Their release rate now is every 6 weeks. It used to be every 6 months, and they're going to get down to every 4 weeks. In terms of not every team will release, but they have the capability to release every 4 weeks. And there's some really good stuff here. We've got a portfolio Kanban system where all the business and tech leads get together once a week, and we track flow, or lack thereof, more to be the point, of MVPs. With lots of really ugly bottlenecks and scary problems. We've gotten rid of 3/4 of the handoffs because of team and tribe structure. We still have operational reviews and security and architecture and all that terribleness, but what I call that sort of like self-imposed handoffs where on my team, your team, your team, your team, we reorganize around the value. And we continue to reorganize around the value. So there's some good stuff. Half the teams actually can do a decent story map. You look at it and go, hey, that's actually not half bad, right? The other half, you're like, guys, I don't want to teach you story. If I do another story map with you, I'm gonna kill myself. But that's what it is. Even if a lot of the stories are tasks, they've gotten good at saying this team can do between 10 and 15 stories a month. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 5, but it's predictable enough across these 10 to 12 teams that we're able to load the backlogs at a macro level and get some reasonable macro planning done, and it's reasonably accurate. That's actually amazing. You don't see that very often. Here's the classic consulting response to poor story quality. Hey, let's go and take all of the story practices that we think are good. I think these are actually pretty good practices. Story mapping, story grooming and sketching, story specifications, testing with story specifications. We kind of you could break it up in any way. And we're like, here are all the things that make good stories. Here's this awesome laundry list. Now I know what to do. Let's have at it. Let's show everybody how their stories look like. Let's assess those stories. And let's get them on a plan to make good stories. How do you think that went? Who wants to? You're laughing because you probably did.
Well, I'm guessing you wouldn't be telling us if it went well.
Yeah, probably not. I'm still in the what a dumbass I am part of the presentation, right?
There's only like 60 things we have to do there.
Exactly, right? Like, how would that make you feel? Hey, like, I'm going to go look at you. Who here? Job title is I build, write, and create stories and test them. Who's really involved in story writing here? Nobody? There's got to be somebody here who's so really involved in story writing. Okay. All right, at least there's one person. How would you feel if I came up to you with this list and said, we're going to go through all your stories, and we're going to just kind of like see where the deltas are and get you to be the best story writer in the world by making sure you do all this stuff? I can tell you already, you tell me to get lost, right? It just would not work, right? So I would say that we got some lackadaisical attention. Okay, it's the whole kind of, the coaches are telling us what to do, let's just go do it till they go away. At worst, we have people saying, you know what, I feel attacked, I feel like you're putting my job on the line, I got yelled at a few times, like literally, I personally got yelled at. And I was like, wow, I need to change things up, this is not working. It's interesting, it was the day before the Agile conference in Toronto went on, and the next day I saw Michael Sahoda's talk. And it's just funny because I was laughing because like he's basically Michael was making fun of like the pushy agile coach. I'm like, hey, that's me. So it was pretty interesting. We heard a couple other things we tried to do. Hey, let's go create a maturity model. And by the way, I think these models are all good and they're all not too far from the truth. They're also not doing their job whatsoever. It's just not helping anybody. Hey, what does it mean to kind of be starting? What are some core things? What does it mean to really get going, and how are you going to win at market? And a combination of things we could do. We tried doing better retrospectives. Hey, let's do some 5 whys. Let's do some value stream mapping. We tried this agile maturity model that you can see. We said, hey, well, that's not working. Let's try some other practices. Let's do domain-driven design. Let's do this. Let's try some other things. Why don't we go and make sure that the teams have improvement tickets on their boards? Why don't we make sure the Scrum Masters really know how to do cumulative flow diagrams with better training? None of it worked. Or if it worked, it didn't work in a noticeable way. So I kind of want to make this presentation authentic because a lot of this came from a very personal place. After the story writing fiasco, what I'll call it, I actually had to take a step. I could say, I'm not sure if I want to do this anymore. I'm not sure if I want to be in the agile space anymore. I don't know if I want to help transition people anymore. This is just too hard. And I feel like an asshole. And I'm tired of feeling an asshole. These barriers are probably things you've all seen here. Indifference. You really mean and go incompetence. People that just shouldn't be in the job. Lack of safety. Decades of cultural debt. A mindset that's just not shifting. Right? Like you can tell by sentence 1, you're like, oh boy. 2 years. This is 2 years, right? So for me, personally, agile practices are hard to teach, hard to coach, and they take a lot of effort to get sustainable change. Blanket statement, some true, some not true, some easier, some better, different situations. But for the most part, I haven't been able to change the mindset, get clarity of thought in the people doing the work. I haven't successfully got them over that steep learning curve. And I've watched, even when I got those things all going and then I left, the practices almost got coerced back to what was familiar to what they were, right? Like, well, that's Scrumafall, or that's, that's definitely Kanban done with, a massive waterfall process, or that's, everything's going backwards. So, anyone played Get Kanban before? Okay. Awesome game. I totally recommend it. What Get Kanban does is it lets you operate as a team, and you have a system of work, very anemic workflow, analysis, dev, test, just to make it simple. But it makes the entire team manage their flow, track their flow, and look at the impact of the different decisions they make on that flow, right? The interesting thing about Kanban is it's lumped in there with all the other agile methods. And it is another one of those agile methods, but it's really I'll call it sort of like a meta method. It doesn't tell you to use stories, doesn't tell you what your flow is going to be, doesn't tell you what your states are going to look like, doesn't tell you how to move things across those states. It tells you that you should visualize what you're doing. It tells you that less is more, get to flow. It tells you to make all your problems really, really visible. And it tells you to constantly engage in dialogue that changes your system of work over time. So it's almost like a set of guidelines with some very specific implementations that you can use, but it's up to you whether the board's physical, or it's electronic, or in Excel. It's up to you whether you want to use stories or use cases or customer pain points or whatever you care to call them. It's up to you to figure out what your flow is. We've done a lot of Kanban in the past. The problem with our Kanban is, I'll call it, is Agile ban. Right? Hey, we know that stories are good, so let's make sure that we have a state in there called discovery where you do story mapping and architecture mapping. We know that spec by example is good, and story grooming is good, so let's have a story sketching state. So we had this kind of like best practices flow that we wanted people to start with, and then they could alter it from there. What we decided to do is deliberately take a step back from all of that. You could call it naked Kanban, you call it a couple of things, but what we want, actually I feel like there's a step missing here. Let me make sure I didn't miss it. Well, I might have missed a slide, so I'm going to talk about, for me, what is critical to making a team self-organizing and making them able to adapt. The first is, I'm still a big believer in visualizing their work. If you don't visualize what's going on, people just, it takes in knowledge work, once there's maybe 3 people in a team, no one knows what anybody else is doing. And that kills agility, right? You get to 7 people, 10 people, suddenly you have a value stream where there's UX people involved, and there's product owners, and there's architects, whatever. It just becomes invisible. So I still really believe in visualizing your flow. The flow has to be contained or filled with items that everybody who's participating in that flow cares about. So not tasks. You can call them stories, you can call them value increments, you can call them customer requests, it doesn't matter. But if only one part of that value stream cares about that flow, then it's not a valuable item on the system. The other one is the team needs a massively safe space to be able to discuss what their flow looks like. They need to be able to discuss, more importantly, what are all the problems that they're having, and be able to make alterations in an extremely lightweight way. I think lighter weight than some of the Scrum ceremonies apply. The Scrum ceremonies is kind of like 3 ceremonies every sprint. It's a lot of stuff to do. You're planning, you're reviewing, you're retroing. It's like, a lot of teams would say, Scrum's a really heavyweight framework. And I'm like, wow, it's supposed to be so lightweight. But it's like lighter. It's got to be light. And teams need a way to communicate the value they're producing and adjusting and altering in a way that actually helps stakeholders guide, direct, and unblock them, right? Like, you've got to have very, very good ways of communicating to the outside world so that they can, A, provide the constraints that teams require to go in a certain direction, More importantly than the constraints is unblock them and get things out of their way. I had a slide on this and it got disappeared somewhere, so I kind of did that from memory. So that's what we wanted to implement. So that's what we're going to focus on. So the first thing we did is we said, okay, any cadence that we've given to you in the past is now optional. Team, go discuss which of these you want to do and which you don't. If you want to do sprint planning still, do it. If you want to do reviews, do them by retros, but they're now all completely optional. That's still kind of a work in progress because people are very scared to abandon processes that have been given to them. Even when the same person who gave it to them is now saying, sorry, go do what you need to do. The second thing we did is we put in one mandatory constraint. You've got to have a weekly session, and in that weekly session, we want you to review what happened, we want you to discuss problems, we want you to introduce improvements, and then plan for the next week. So the review, the retro, and the planning, and we want you to do it in less than half an hour. Now that was not successful the first few weeks, but now it's 15, 20 minutes for you, right? They get all of that done in 20 minutes. And I'll show you how. The entire team is now responsible for a flow. It's not the Scrum Master or Product Owner's job anymore. So everything is using physical. Physical cleaner flow diagrams. If you want to do lead time, it's physical. And by the way, at the beginning, to really maximize accountability, we did that. You don't get Kanban, like often you'll give the tester the blue pen and the developer the green pen. We said, hey, testing team, here's your red pen. Whenever something moves, feel free to update the CFD. It's not Scrum Master's job. Developer, here's the blue pen. I know it sounds very siloed, but we're getting some very, very specific accountability on the people to look at their flow. And I'll show you some really interesting benefits in a second. And so we really made say, guys, you guys are accountable for this, and you guys physically are accountable for doing it. Then we said, coaches will not only not teach any new Agile practices, we will refuse to teach you new Agile practices unless you can point what happened in your flow that caused you to want to do that and suggest what will happen if we teach you this. We have a lot less Agile coaching requests now for practices. We still get a couple, but that's the prereq. So now we went from let's kind of force things down your throat to let's no. You guys think you need this, show me. And if you don't have the ability to look at what's going, by the way, once you get a little bit of practice here, the bottlenecks and problems you'll see are obvious. And then it's very easy for them to tie together, this thing could help me based on this problem. So here's the system that we asked everyone to do. Hey guys, what's a weekly session look like? Imagine you have a really simple flow. Everyone has a different flow now though, by the way. Discovery, delivery, release. I'm making it super simple for you guys. We have the product owners and the UX guys kind of, really holding the pen on discovery. Engineering and testers are really holding the pen on delivery, and a combination of the testers and the PO we're looking at release. We sort of said, here's the pen, here's the pen, here's the pen. Every week they come in, they literally count tickets just like in the Get Kanban game. They actually, in some cases, color-coded their columns just like in the Get Kanban game, and just said, guys, count from right to left, add it up. They would do that, and then right in place, they would put either a red sticky, some people use blue, so right there and say, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. Now, if there was an improvement that got put in place, they did something too, they'd put a green sticky and say, hey, and this is why this was good, and this is why this is good, and this is why this is good. So what did that give us? We got an audit trail for improvement. We've got extreme, I'll call it radical participation from the entire team. The first few of these meetings went like this. This makes no sense. You didn't count it properly. From our mostly outsourced, I'm going to make, just going to add a bit of cultural context here. In some of the outsourced groups I've been with, there's an interesting pattern where the engineers are mostly male and the testers are mostly female. And there's actually relates where the male developer is married to the female tester, and there's all this cultural, it's not, it is what it is, it's all everyone's moving, but there's this cultural subservience that's going on. And not a lot of opportunities for testers to speak out. It's really interesting, and people were worried about this. I've never seen testers call people out on their shit more than I saw in these meetings. That's not a story. That I can't test that, it doesn't count. Or you can't do math, I'm going to go do that for you. To the Scrum Master who used to be responsible for doing this. So some extreme, what I call rebellion, which I actually called adequate rebellion. I thought it was quite good, right? Like people that are typically not speaking are speaking, which is amazing. The team would kind of update their CFD, and then we'd say, hey, what do you think is going to happen next week? What do you predict? And they would say, we'll commit to that. And I'm like, you're not committing to anything. Stop committing. There's no more commitment language here. Predict. What do you think is going to happen? And once we got out of commitment language and prediction language, by the way, that's still there. Like even one of the Scrum Masters was amazing. This guy's great. He said, yeah, we did our commitments. And I'm like, commitments? He's like, predictions. Predictions, guys. Because people predict a lot more than they commit to. So the tickets get counted, the predictions get made, the problems get listed. Most improvements get manifested in two ways. They go right up to the Kanban board and say, so we're going to make a change, and they scratch out a policy right then and there and add a new one. Some we created improvement tickets, but we're trying to maximize the things that they can change. So they're actually altering their flow on the fly. If the flow is broken, and some of our upstream flow is still broken on some of these teams, we're like, okay, we have to stop. We are going to commit to an improvement this sprint or this weekly interval, and that will be fix our upstream flow. Because they have to actually, in some cases when they're doing it, the flow is so badly broken that they have to just exit out and do it again. I'll show you some examples. Sorry, I missed one thing. The entire team has to agree on what goes through the system, right? They were doing a whole lot of like, oh, this could be a story. It's some back-end thing. It could be tested. I'm like, will it be tested? No, it's not a story. It's a task. We flip the mindset from tracking effort to tracking collaboration. Tuna flow diagram tracks collaboration. I did something, then I collaborated with somebody else, then I collaborated with somebody else. And that's what really a CFD should track. It's not effort, right? So this is an interesting one. Can someone see what the problem is here, even if you don't know what any of the states are? We've got two states like no inventory. Yeah. We've got one state going through a massive amount of inventory, and the rest of the states have no inventory. Does that look agile to you? Does that look effective to you? Does it look productive to you? No, it's insanity. But that was like every team was starting like this. They would do it, some stuff would happen, and then it would go the other way. So, and you wouldn't see it on any of the flow systems. So it was invisible. So this is one of our teams, and you're just like, this is craziness. We started asking them to physically start tracking it and writing it down, and they're like, guys, what are we doing? And they started committing to, week by week, what they could do. And so this is not what I would call perfect agile, by any sense of the means. But people are collaborating and communicating with each other. The inventory is starting to go down. So people are doing a few stories. Engineering is working collaboratively with them to do that. Engineering then kind of does its thing. Working in collaboration with testers, so the testers know how they're going to test this thing. One of the most interesting things, I'll show you in the next one actually, is they had a massive bottleneck in testing. In fact, I'll just skip to it and I'll talk about it in a second. This one here, testing was not happening at all, right? So the BA started helping testing, and they realized that if a BA wrote their own story spec or story grooming and then tested it, it was an order of magnitude faster. We're like, man, that was fast. They're like, that was easy. And we're like, okay, can now have the testers write some specs and get them to test their own things too? What do you think about that? They're a little bit like, I don't know, raining cats and dogs, but they're starting to think about it. So this is what I would call a team that's still under high duress. Can you tell me why it's under high duress? A great thing about CFDs is you can know nothing about a team's system, nothing about their process, and just go like this and this. Whenever you see that, anytime two things are going at different angles, you're at high duress.
Well, the progress is flattening out.
Yeah, there's no progress in discovery. This is the team that actually needs to redo their discovery approach entirely. They're doing a big UX redesign across the entire platform. And the traditional way of doing stories and specking and everything else just doesn't make sense for what they're trying to do. And it's just a whole bunch of churn. The architecture's changed. So we actually, we did our last sprint planning with them 2 days ago. It actually now, it's another week along. It looks like this. It's even worse. And they know they're going to do this. This is one of these boom and bust teams where then all of a sudden it's going to go up like this again. So we're redoing all this from scratch. But even then, this team is tracking their problems and their solutions every sprint. They missed a few here, but it's reasonably good. And anybody can come in, and you probably can't read all this on your own. You need a little bit of a walkthrough, but it's really easy to record the history of this team and see what's going on. And the big thing they have here is they've got a few things that were like, hey, when the same person does it, it's much faster than having to do all these handoffs. And by the way, we really need to get our UX in discovery. We really need to figure that stuff out because it's, this team is about to starve. But now everyone knows it. I saw the director on the business and tech side by this board looking at it and talking with the team and what can we do. And so there's like the things that just were not happening before. Extremely powerful. Believe it or not, this is probably the highest maturity team in the group. And it looks crazy, doesn't it? Whenever I see people
What happened that week?
What happened this week is the team, a number of things. The team realized that, so if you know what this team's throughput was, you would see how many stories are in discovery here. So we got 175 to, that's 35 stories in discovery. Then there's another, so there's 45 stories that are in pre-engineering state, some state. But if you look at their throughput, they're going from, like this is a 2-week interval, you can see that engineering is going from 193, 102, so they got to 141, 50 sprints, and 1, 2, 8, 50. So there's 7 stories a week. And they've got 50, 60 stories in their backlog. It's huge. That's like 3-4 months worth of work. What happens when you have too much work lying around? Yeah, what happens to rework?
Oh, yeah.
You and always do it twice. So this team was like this, and they went, holy crap, this is garbage and wrong, and we've changed our assumptions and how we're going to do it, and what we want to do is change, and they deliberately kicked it all back. They haven't kicked it back here yet, because they still think the story map might be okay, but they're in the process now of dropping all that too. And they were about to do more discovery. And then they went, wait a minute, if I'm up here and you're down here, 140 to 235, that's 95 stories in your backlog. So that's like 12, it's a lot of work, right? Like, I can't do basic math, I apologize. But there's a ton of work. They're about to drop that down too. So that's why I consider this to be a very high maturity team. They also said, hey, you know what? Why don't we make sure that we only have 1 sprint maximum's worth of work in sketching and specking combined, and 2 sprints of discovery. They said we should never be more than a month to 6 weeks ahead of the engineering team. That's still very waterfallish by lots of standards. That would fail the Scrum test. It would fail extreme programming. But they finally introduced a WIP limit with no prodding from the coaches. In fact, the Scrum Master wasn't even there this time around. This team is so good that the Scrum Master doesn't have to facilitate. He doesn't even show up. They just keep doing it. He comes in halfway through. How's it going, guys? I was surprised. I walked over to see this weekly flow meeting. I'm like, wow, these guys are doing it on their own. So this is like easily the Scrum Master for this team is actually showing up in the Kanban meetup on Monday. I'm going to talk about this again. They'll talk about this. So this is a really good one. So lots of wordy, almost agile, not quite, kind of stuff's going on. But the team is showing the ability to diagnose something, and more importantly, I want to show some policies. These are some of the policies on some of their teams. Everyone heard of Kanban Policies before? Yeah. A Kanban policy says that when I'm in discovery, here are the things that we should do, and here are the things that we should do them with. I like to call them knowledge worker agreements. It sounds a lot less like, the government's come in and said, yeah, thou shalt do, right? So I call them knowledge worker agreements or working agreements. And I think I've gone into an argument with David J. Anderson over that one, but whatever. And the old policies here used to look like discovery, do a story map, relative sizing. It's all like straight out of the Agile textbook. If you just grab a textbook and say, hey, practice 5 through 7. The policies now say members from all areas of the team, at least one each, need to participate in the story mapping. So minimum 1 BA tester and developer have to be there, or else the story map's not considered done. We want the story mapping has to be sliced so that each feature we do has value. Their features used to be functionally decomposed. They're nothing sliced. So they're almost like mini MVPs, right? If the solution architect hasn't seen what we're thinking, it's stuck. Other people had things like Discovery should not be facilitated by the Scrum Master. That was one of them. Must be by the BA or the tester. Right? So they had very specific fit-for-purpose policies. That one of the things I basically said to them is, guys, see this policy board that the coaches basically made for you, filled with Agile practices. If it's not mostly erased and destroyed within 3 months, will have failed. It's got to be yours. You have to own it, but you don't have, we put some constraints in there, like you have to own it. You have to manage flow. It's valuable. And then we just said, we're getting out of the way, basically. So there's some really, really neat things happening here. So kind of like, here's one of the real systems. You didn't realize how far people would be from the room, so you probably can't read anything. No. So that's okay, I'll just talk to it. The team knowledge worker agreements are under each state. Like, these are your states that are happening over here, but they're all now real agreements that they've come up with, and they're theirs, basically. We're still coaching them that when they come up with an agreement, write it down, or else you're going to forget. There's still a bit of, oh yeah, there's the newest thing I go, and then I walk and go, but I can't see that here. And they're like, well, we know. I'm like, guys, the best way to defend from the loudest person in the room is to put a little mini contract in place and says, guys, we agreed to this, this is what we said. If we're not going to do it, let's exit out. We're going to change it. And so getting very, very regiment on, if you're not doing it, the coaches now will not say, hey, you didn't do this. We're going to say, hey, you're not doing this. I'm taking it out. And guys, this has to be reflective of what's going on. Little area here for the impact of their teams. There's their CFD, all the problems, all the improvements. This team did something that's quite interesting too, pretty much on their own. Is they borrowed something out of the lean change method, which is where each of those kind of like improvements they do, they created a change hypothesis. So every time the policy changes, they have one here that says, if we have a different swim lane for change requests, UX was always coming in with last minute changes. So they created a version of they call it the magic lane, and the magic lane is where all the nonsense comes from. And they track the magic lane, basically. And so they say how many stories have come through the magic lane versus regular. Just by doing that, the number of stories coming through the magic lane has dramatically reduced.
What's the width limit in there?
2. The magic lane, they have a width limit of 2. There's 0 in it right now. So at the beginning, there's 4. Right? So I think what that
Do you have
did,
another one for executives, or
that's anything that comes in
anything
out
at all
of
doesn't
the
have
order, it comes in through the magic lane. Doesn't matter why, because what would happen is that a team would be halfway through engineering, and that's when VPs would go look at the UX and have their comments.
Yeah.
And that would either be done on the heroics of the team, right?
And it's existential width that doesn't get measured.
Yeah, it doesn't really count, doesn't whatever, lots of engineering heroics.
Yeah.
So the magic lanes helped, for sure.
Nice.
They've got another one here. We actually did a bit of waterfall here. At the portfolio level, we said that we need a minimum of 2 sprints worth of WIP that is what's considered UX ready. We were trying to integrate UX more into the teams, more and more and more, and we did it when a Kanban is called a buffer. And a buffer, you use a buffer whenever you have really expensive resources, engineering, that can't afford to be down, and you have highly variable process in the front that is not consistently delivering the goods. The Agile approach is to bring it together, but what you can do in Kanban is create what's known as a buffer that says we need a minimum of X amount of work in this buffer because, you know what, it doesn't come in a regular interval, and we need some, it does create longer lead times, it does reduce feedback, it does do all the things you don't want to happen in a waterfall system, an Agile system, but you do it because you're not ready to go super lean, and you need to avoid feast or famine of your extremely expensive resources. Yeah. So they put in some very specific UX policies of what it meant to be done, and this is just them taking part of that, what tribe buffer, I guess you could call it. Yeah.
Jeff, you said to use a buffer because they were expensive resources. Is that really the reason, or is it the reason because they're on the critical path and they're actually the bottleneck?
The engineering could get it done fast, but there's a lot of them, right? So I don't think what you're saying is wrong. It's also true. So I'm trying to explain it in a different way. Upstream, you have few resources, but they're doing stuff that's highly variable in their lead time. So the discovery team. Discovery could go really fast, or it could take a long time, and that actually improves with maturity and lowering your WIP and all that kind of good stuff. But a lot of the upstream processes, as we know in most big banks, are anything but. And so they tend to be big batch, coming in like feast or famine. And, you know, there's a whole lot of variation in there. And until they get more into doing flow and doing things just in time, that variation will continue to exist. So we tried to fix the upstream thing the proper way for about 6 months, and we couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So then what we did is said, okay, we're going to go put a buffer in here, and whenever that buffer has less stories in it than a certain amount, we said it was, 3 sprints worth of work is what we said, 6 weeks worth of work. As soon as any of those buffers have less than 6 weeks of work, we call the yellow card the red card. Now they all have less than 6 weeks worth of work in them, but most of those buffers have something in them now. So the teams, because the teams downstream, they can get it done relatively quickly because they're able to apply more people to the problem space than in the upstream area. So it's not uncommon to have a team of 5 to 12 people on it, all doing design, test, build, engineering style activities. It's equally just as common to have a very smaller upstream team of architect, UX, whoever you name it, doing the overall agnostic stuff. And adding more people to that team doesn't make it go faster, right? And even downstream, adding more people up to the point is going to make it go slower too. But you can get more people into the downstream area than the upstream area. So that's my first real use of a buffer, and we tried it, and it's definitely helping. Now that we've got it, we're like, okay, guys, can we please fix this stuff? Because we still get lots of quality issues and rework. Everyone's heard that one of the keys of self-organization comes from constraints. Mm-hmm. So the new management isn't about tasking people and telling them what to do, and you do this today and you do that tomorrow. You say, what constraints can I put in place that are going to allow people to self-organize around? The best example would be any time you play a video game or a board game. There's these rules that tell you exactly what you can and can't do, and then what you do is you creatively work within that system in a completely independent way. And it doesn't feel like you're following rules. It feels like you're thinking, self-organizing. It feels like you're being creative. But there's a whole lot of things that are the level set. So some things that we did to level set. Teams, you don't have a choice. We're not going to debate this, argue it. No one did, actually, because, like you said, it was a bit of a either ignore or subserving culture anyway. And we were trying to get through the ignoring part. So, and we had a lot of buy-in for this as well. So it was that something needed to change. So you have to meet frequently to discuss flow. You have to. Some people are weekly, some people are twice a week. But and for us, frequent was weekly. Everybody has to participate. Yeah. No half-day teams, no collaborate, no running bot, no being facilitated Scrum Master. Most teams are still have a bit of a facilitator, but it rotates every week. You've got to make sure you write down the impediments to your flow. So once you've tracked it, what went wrong, what went well. You've got to track all of that stuff. Everything, one thing we said is, everything that goes through it, because this is an engineering team, has to be testable and tested. So if you create a story and say, well, this is testable, like a lot of times you just
test it.
Then you have to test it. If you don't test it, it becomes a task. And literally their CFTs have to drop. Part of that other drop over there, by the way, was they had a whole lot of French language translation stories.
6 weeks.
They dropped them out. They threw them all out. They're like, these aren't stories. The tester said, we're not testing any of this. That's in the original story. We're not counting it, and they dropped the stories, right? So it's got testable and tested may not apply to your context, but it did for ours, right? So testable and tested. Some people were doing, we have a story called Build Database, and the tester looked at it. I'm like, that is a review. That is not a test. That does not count, guys. I don't need testers to spot check that you're able to build a database. Yeah, so they got it, right? So there's a bit of playing with it in some places, but they got it. If the workflow is not changed, it's useless. Takiono said that if your process hasn't been changed in the last few months, no one's following it, and throw it out. The original Toyota guy in the manufacturing world said, write it with a pencil, right? So my favorite, I don't like it when they actually, some of them, like, we print them and it's all nice and neat. I hate that. I'm like, can you just scratch it out with a pen so I can see the change? Like, that's just my suggestion. I like it when it's messy. I like it when it looks like it's been erased and it's changed, right? This is a big one. We've now put up a bigger coaching Kanban flow that says, observe the condition, suggested improvements, focused coaching, sustainable, they can teach us kind of flow. And we say we're not getting past any of the practice unless we get past the observe. And the observe could be as simple as going to your CFD and saying, wow, there's a huge gap here. and it's not moving. I think that if we just had better story mapping, it would help. Okay, we think that will reduce the amount of in-progress work. That's the only thing you need to do to get it to be scientific. You said, I think that I see an observable state, I put a number beside it, a really simple number. Number of happy people in a room is a number. Like, doesn't have to be complicated. But you say, we're not going to go and help you unless we do this with you first. And so that's our first point of contact as we go to their flow. Other people now are realizing that that diagram alone is not good enough, so they've got things called the percentage of stories that were first pass stories, i.e. value stories versus failure. So they're doing some failure versus value. Some of them are doing lead time of MVPs and features. Some of them are tracking rework. So people are now starting to branch out, but we're saying if we can't at least simply write it down and say what it looks like, we don't want to introduce new practices.
Anything you can track, you can graph, and then you have
Right.
information.
And we're okay with you graphing something and then saying I don't want to graph this anymore and then not doing it ever again. Like we're not trying to track metrics to do metrics overload.
But it's to understand.
To understand.
And the second to last point there, I think is super important too.
Yeah, like you have to, and it doesn't have to be scientific. Like you don't have to say by X% or whatever. You just have to say we think this will go down or this will go up. You know, we think lead time will go down. We think lead time will go up. We think throughput will go up.
And then let's measure it.
Yeah. We think WIP will go down. And let's meet in 2 weeks and say what happened. Yeah, and but really, like the whole team does it, looks at it, and goes, did it go up? Did it go down? Yay or nay? Move on. So what we're trying to do is probably we're trying to do the simplest form of scientific management we can possibly do to just get people on the same page, because the biggest enemy of politics, or the biggest countermeasure of politics, is actually very, very simple data. Very, very simple information can actually get a lot of politics out the door. But it has, the key for us at least, in what I'll call these sort of like low maturity, large enterprises with lots of culture of debt, is what is the simplest, most immersive thing that we can do that makes sure everybody's collaborating. Stop worrying about scaling it. Stop worrying about making it the best it can be. Stop making it perfect. What can these people do to create what I'll call collective intelligence? That's what we're trying to do. So to get this team to be as smart as an individual. Most teams are dumber than individuals. Most organizations are dumber than teams. Most enterprises are the stupidest beast you could possibly imagine. It just, as you go up in scale, it gets dumber.
You want to make them smarter, though.
Sorry?
You want to make them smarter.
And you want to make them smarter, because then we see organizations that are actually get bigger and are smarter, right? Like teams are smarter than individuals, and you know the tribe is smarter than the team, and you're like when you do it right, your intelligence goes up as you get bigger. But in most cases, it's the opposite.
So one question, Jeff. In all of this that you've been discussing, your real audience here is the team. You're not trying to impress some executive yet.
No,
right?
so I'll talk about some
end.
So see our next waves of change.
Yeah.
5 minutes past 1. I just want you to have the chance to go through all your material.
Sorry, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you said, 5 minutes past 1, or am I past 5 minutes?
You're past 5 minutes.
All right, so yeah, I'm on my last slide, so I'm just going to say, there's some other things that are going on with this as well. We have a tribe level board, which has nothing but tracks MVPs. Swim lane for each team. We have a weekly stand-up, where not only the business, but business support shows up, technology shows up, right? So we have higher level things. We're just starting to institute a weekly where the VPs come in, they look at the portfolio board, and they go, I would like a review of this, 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 and this, regardless of the state they're in, guided by policies that say where the VPs review, and then we're going to do.
But as a result of all of this, it's clearer to them.
It's clear to them. Yeah. So this is not happening on its own. There are other changes to work with executives and do those things, but we're actually doing the same approach writ large. We're just scaling it up one level. I think that's my last slide, except for questions.
All right. Thank you.
Nice.
So you have, I just want to double check, before you gave the teams the responsibility to own their CFPs and do it for their boards, you had them all do the Get Kanban game, correct?
We taught them Get
Kanban.
Kanban.
Through the Get Kanban game, and then they did it using mail.
We taught them Get Kanban right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like so our classic approach was, hey, I don't know, half a day on Kanban, half a day on stories, half a day on Scrum, half a day on, I don't know, business model, whatever the mix was, but Kanban would almost always be in there. But then we would go and give the Scrum Master the job of running the sprint review, sprint perspective, sprint planning, and tracking metrics. Just a big miss on our part, basically. Yeah.
I'm afraid, and I kind of tell me if I'm going in a different direction. But I'm afraid that your message gets a tiny bit lost. This is how I heard it. This is not what I think you're doing. So
Yeah, let me know how you heard it, because that'd be good. Because if it's lost to you, it might be lost to some others. So
what I heard is, don't coach teams on agile practices. Coach them on different practices. I don't think that's what you're doing.
No, what I'm saying is,
hang on for a second.
yeah, go.
What I think you're actually saying, or what I think you're doing, but it's not coming across that way, and I want to make that distinction because it's important, is you're coaching teams on being able to coach themselves, on seeing what's going on, and then you're providing answers when they ask for certain practices that might help resolve some of the issues that they're seeing. That's what you're doing. That's not what came across. And I want to make that distinction because it's a very important one.
Yeah, I mean, here's the problem. So CFDs and Kanban are like, just be like, that's just another practice. And you're saying that's the practice to use. What I'm saying is, if you find me another mechanism to do that, then do it. I mean, this is the method that I use because it's the one I know. That you want teams to be in a state where they can observe the impact of their decisions and use that as a baseline to introducing other practices. So, so it might not be flow in your context.
Introduce practices to solve a problem, not introduce practices for the sake of introducing.
Right. You have to have a hypothesis that if I introduce, as an example, one of those teams, you saw they're flatlining on their discovery. It's completely flatlining. So, we have to go in as coaches and help and say we're going to alter your flow and introduce or not some practices, but it's going to be based on the hypothesis that this will stop flatlining, right? And if we can't get to that team self-awareness that that's why we're doing it, then it's not going to stick. So yes, to your point, it's not about do this practice or that practice. It's about, one way you could say is we are selecting some practices that help as a linchpin and give you into that sort of like experimental state. You have to do something, but you might come up with something different. It might not be CFDs. It might not be, it might not be workflow. It's just that's the one that I know. Yeah.
I think I maybe just had an aha moment. What we've been doing is introducing the practices or the frameworks, the ceremonies or whatever thing it is, and then later on we go, now that we're running it, then we'll apply the metrics to
that's what I used to do too.
But I think what you're doing is say, no, put the metrics on current state, what you're doing, because that'll then inform which practices.
Yeah, as long as it's really, really simple
right.
and really collaborative,
right.
I feel like that's the right way to go. I feel like tracking your flow, you could use velocity. I have problems with velocity, but like getting that number down and getting the team to say, if we do X, what will happen, and then looking at X, right, and looking at Y.
Half the battle is getting over resistance of the teams to change that behavior. Yeah. If you show them first what's the effect of the behaviors that they have today, then half the battle is actually already won.
Because they see the needle move.
Yeah.
They see the result of the change.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what we used to do. Metrics comes in week 8. Or month 2, or we don't need metrics for a long time because they're not there yet. It's like,
or then the metric becomes the goal.
Yeah.
That's the other risk.
Any other questions, guys? Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that assumes a certain amount of, I guess, Kanban literacy, which so there's no bad questions, guys.
You had it.
Sorry, you and then you.
Okay. One question is, like, a lot of times we've seen that people start gaming the system, right? So even in your case, the flow, it can kind of, people can start showing that people have started doing more and more stories instead of, and which will show much bigger progress. So
right. So, I mean, that's what happens when you have an individual responsible for putting something together to show to a larger audience. When a team is all built, like everyone's got, and by the way, one thing I didn't show you is at the beginning I gave the blue pen to the tester, the green pen to the developer, and the orange pen to the VA. At the end, it was like, no, everyone's just going around and doing it on their own, right? Like everybody's, sometimes one guy had 5 pens, another guy's doing no hand, and they're all actually doing it. When an entire team engages in building something, and they're doing it agile style, like the way they were doing their CFDs was like, hey, what was this again? And the BA and the engineer are working together, and they're updating it. There's a lot less ability to game, because this is, to your point, as teams you go from individual to team, if you do it right, you start getting smarter, because everyone holds each other accountable, and makes each other honest. So when you do organizations the right way, they become smarter than the individual. And so the trick for us was to make sure that this was the entire team's process and that they did it together. If you do that and then you make it safe, hey, no outsiders allowed unless the team invites you in, then the gaming goes. Now people still make mistakes, like I thought that was a story and it wasn't, and but they're holding each other more accountable to that. They're challenging each other rather than just the coach coming in and doing all the challenge.
But I think one of the advantages I see is like with the regular Scrum or the velocity kind of matrix, you can actually game it much more because you can increase the velocity. In this case, the flow you cannot, even if you increase the number of stories, but the flow should still remain.
It'll remain the same. It'll just take longer to get done,
exactly.
right? So,
right.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something about this? Those metrics and the flow and diagrams that you showed, are those reported to management?
Yes, up to, not reported to.
They come and see.
They come and see, yeah.
Right.
So
they're not slapping
Facade.
the team's wrists when something goes wrong. And
No.
that's the bigger
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as soon as those metrics are reported to management and are used to actually compare them with other teams, that's when you get all the gain. And the metrics are only serve the team's own interest and help them to visualize what the problems are, where they need help, where they can do things, where they can introduce some practices.
I mean, we use the metrics.
They don't give.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We use them because I wanted to just clarify. The metrics are used to do throughput planning. So, like, we have this VP director level throughput planning, so people know what the metrics are. And there was some concern at the beginning that when we did this, they were going from 100 stories a month to 20 because they had too many tasks in there. And there was some like, oh my God, we're like, this is going to make us look bad. But we had very good director and VP level support to say we don't care. Like, no one cares about the stories per month.
The difference is that 20 is meaningful and
Yes.
not.
Yeah. And in fact, that's the message that we got right from the top. The good thing is that, and by the top at the V level, not necessarily the S level, the VP level, is they said, we don't care about these numbers, we care about the value, and if the value is expressed in 20 widgets or 100 widgets, doesn't matter. Yeah, sorry.
So you showed us some really good examples of how a particular team latched on to some of the ideas and started showing impediments and tracking to the CFDs.
Yeah.
How reproducible have you found that to be? Because you have, I think you said 12 teams. Have you seen those same behaviors emerging on the other teams?
Yeah, so all 12 teams, I'd say there are 2 that are like not there yet. There are the majority of them that are, like, I gave you kind of half those CFDs. I showed you like 4 different CFDs. So they all fall into that sort of like, third are doing it like amazing. The other third are doing it with severe problems, and then there's, maybe not third, then there's other 2 that are like, guys, we really got to talk about this, So it's definitely a 75 to 80%. I would consider it success, basically, on when it's working. In this context, maybe it doesn't replicate out that way. Yeah.
Has this been since the October? Like, this has been just the last few months then?
How long has this taken? Longer than I like. We introduced it in August, maybe July. Ashley, when did we start doing it? Yeah, about August. And I thought it would be like, a quick 6-week endeavor, 4-week endeavor, but it's still going on. Which shows you how basic you have to make things and how slow the change can be.
Can you touch base on this 15-20 minute practice where you go through retro, demo, and planning?
Yeah, so it was literally this one up here. We call it the weekly flow meeting, and literally it's sprint review, what got done, internal sprint review, not the demo part, right? That's going to happen now. It's been decoupled out. So the internal review part of it, like what's our throughput, what's our lead time, then it's retrospective, which is go and put on some impediments on the bottom of the thing, what happened, why, and then go right to the Kanban board and make change. That's your retro. You've just adjusted it. The power about that is before we're doing retros in another room, the artifacts aren't there. You can't see the flow. You can't see what your workflow looks like. You don't even know what your CFD was. You're not seeing anything. Now you got this team across the entire board going, yeah, we didn't do that. We should have, or maybe we shouldn't, or let's go and strike it out. So you got the team actually changing the board right then and there. So it becomes much more meaningful. Now that you've decided how you're going to make change, you can go and predict what's going to happen. And that's like your PDCA loop or plan, do, check, act loop is right there because you've said, hey, we just made changes to the board. Now let's go plan and predict a bit of flow for a week, see what happens. Are things going to change? So a lot of this team was struggling with is these sort of disconnected meetings. The Scrum Masters are putting lots of content in and preparing them and lots of, PowerPoint and Confluence, whatever, and it was kind of, yet another useless ceremony, basically, right? And I'm not saying that would be the case for all areas and all teams. Just for these guys, that's what it was largely shaping up to. So we wanted to do something that was really close to the physical work assets that they're using, and that allowed them to have a more sort of like, I guess, a holistic conversation between those three concepts.
I have a question. The coaches are all employees of yours?
Yeah, now we're
But the
starting.
Scrum Masters are bank?
Yeah, bank or
So-
TechM or contract.
Yeah, so my question is morale for the Scrum Masters who now may perceive that they're not doing the job they think they're supposed to be doing.
That's a good question. We have some that like it because they're facilitating and enabling.
Well, they're probably being
yeah, and we have some that are struggling because a lot of the Scrum Masters, not a lot, a percentage of the Scrum Masters are really what I call ex-dev managers.
Yeah.
And they're really great at the engineering side of things and the pieces, but not necessarily on the facilitation and creating an environment of self-organization. So they're struggling, and we're coaching as best we can. And but you're right. You've got some. I don't think anyone's outwardly said anything, but I would imagine that there's a shift.
Because I was thinking about this, the coaches all of a sudden, not just going in there and teaching TDD or something.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool because they're working for you. But so many coaches feel that their role is to teach more than to coach. And I just was wondering how that spirit is.
The coaches are
help
great.
them.
Yeah. I mean, the coaches are great because, like I said, we've got a really tight-knit team.
Yeah, and they're yours.
And I was able to convince them that this is a good thing.
Yeah.
And
Well,
they saw
they're your
himself.
employees.
And you probably saw it. Actually, you know what? He's the guy. He did it by himself on a slightly disconnected lab on his own. And I saw that and I'm like, why are these guys doing this? Right? So it wasn't really my idea, I have to tell. It was his idea. I just was like, I'm the kind of guy that has the light bulb, and so I talked to my other coaches, and then they went, we're kind of that type of team where we don't, we're not fundamentally coming at it from different angles, so that makes it easier.
So we have time for one or two more questions.
Okay, sorry guys. So what else? Yes?
So when you started working with those teams, what was the team composition and did you change any?
It hasn't yet. So it's your classic, what I call way too much non-engineering in an IT team. So you've got maybe a team of 12. In some cases they're like 15, and they split them up into 2 squads, so it's 7 and 8. But it's around that range. There's maybe like 3 to 5 engineers, and then the rest are like BAs, testers, Scrum Master, Product Owner, UX types, right? So I think it's not very different from what you'll see in a lot of big IT shops.
And you're using them in multiple ways, like the BAs are being asked to do.
They are self-organizing in some cases to do that, not in all. We have some good, reasonable swarming across the non-engineering roles. And even one BA who was like learning how to code so that she could do Cucumber and sort of that kind of thing. Not a ton, but like a couple of really ones.
So
Sorry, yeah.
When you told your teams that all the Scrum ceremonies are now optional, how did the leaders react on this?
What we did is we preemptively went to the leaders. They were really unhappy with Scrum reviews too, because they weren't getting what they needed. They don't know what a CFD chart is. They don't care about throughput. They don't want to know what the business value. They want to know what the biggest risks are. They want to see the demo. They don't want to. The sprint review is a bit of both, and then maybe that's what we were running and we were doing it wrong, but they wanted a demo. They wanted a review of artifacts at certain states and get deep into that, right? So we've already socialized a mechanism where the executives can go through a portfolio board and say, well, based on where this is, I should be looking, if it's in customer discovery, I should be understanding what the prototypes look like and what customers you're going to go see, or if you're doing problem solution fit interviews, can I see what questions you're asking? So we've got that kind of a mechanism now. It's just starting to stand up. It's a weekly cadence as well. But all of the internal team functional things are now with the team, and all of the stakeholder, executive kind of management pieces are now in a different meeting. So they actually from their end were saying, yeah, we can't stand these meetings. They don't provide that for us. Which may not be true in your context. So yeah. What I don't want you to necessarily implement this weekly session, guys, and then get rid of all your sprint reviews. And feel like I'm not saying that.
But Jeff told us to do it.
Do not do that, right? What I am saying is think about the principles of full team inclusion, safe space for that team. There's some places where when the VPs come in and the director, whatever, people feel safer because that's the energy they bring to that space, and they make it better. Keep your sprint reviews. Do it all there. Like, everyone's getting it. There's places where the scrum masters are excellent and they can work with the team really well to do good CFDs and whatever. So it's like, I guess you don't need to make those changes. In this environment where we are seeing these things, these are the changes we made. Only apply if your context has some similar patterns, basically. And even then, don't do it. Don't do it out of the box.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you again.